our AI decision. Well, even as a staffer or as a research associate, you of course have a little bit of flexibility to choose focus areas, to balance a little bit where you are investing most of your time. And digital, I needed to say from the beginning, I found fascinating in terms of development. You always learn something new. It's also covering a lot of different topics, and maybe this was the most important reason for this decision. It's a rather positive topic. So think about climate change, migration, or wars, and so on. It's all very politicized, it's polarized. It's also rather negative. You are going home in a bad mood. On digital, it's more about how do we bring our society forward? How do we improve our life? So I think this played a major role.
I can understand that. I understand even your passion for institutional reform and better regulation, but where does that interest come from?
Yeah.
Why better?
This is really based on what I saw here in Brussels. So even though I'm still a big fan of the European Union, and I do believe that without having the European Union, Europe would be lost as a continent. You see it in economic terms, you see it when it comes to security, NATO, and so on and so on. That we have the European Union makes us much stronger, gives us still, even though our relative power is declining, it still gives us leverage. And then at the same time, if you are seeing certain things here in Brussels playing out completely in the wrong way, you see that we have a better regulation agenda. We have safeguards like the regulatory scrutiny boards that should prevent lawmaking that is not evidence-based, that is not leading to the envisioned policy outcomes. You begin to question yourself, okay, why is this happening? Why are certain laws passing and becoming a law, even though everyone agrees they are not really up to the task? Why, for example, now going to the AI Act, why the AI Act was passed by the Commission, by the Parliament and by the member states, even though both co-legislators felt the AI Act was not there yet. A lot of articles were legally not sound, but why did it pass? And yeah, I saw a lot of things happening in the wrong way, rules being overlooked, safeguards being bypassed, and so on. And this combined with me being a big fan of the European Union, started a kind of travel for helping the EU to improve, to stick to good governance mechanisms, and so on. And maybe as the last point, there was, of course, also the Draghi Report. So Mario Draghi, the former ECB president and Italian prime minister, made this huge report about our lack in competitiveness in Europe. But he also wrote quite a lot about interinstitutional issues, that there is a need for reforms. So what I did in the past, but also what I'm doing now, is basically, yeah, grounded on findings from Draghi, but also from similar reports in the past.
I can understand that. But you are involved in the discussion on the EU digital rulebook since 2017. So, what were the moments where you were most frightened and personally challenged?
Yeah. Phew, there were a few, not all on digital. This is why I'm now really focusing only on digital. there were a lot of disappointments because Axel Voss and we really argue for big reforms, for significant reforms.
Yeah.
And then all the time we were facing outcomes that were just mini steps forward. And each of those decisions were, of course, quite depressing, quite negative for us. But would say, if I now really would need to finger point to the most stressful and most significant single event, because as I said, it was a series of negative experiences that we had, of course, also positive ones, but the most negative was really the AI Act that I mentioned already, that in those 2.5 months that we had the interinstitutional negotiations about it, where council, so member state and parliament, were trying to improve the text and agree on a final output, and everyone in the room was aware about flaws, and those flaws even more were rather easy to fix. And then still this law was pushed through because some people felt it's important to have the AI Act for the European election in 2024. So I think this was politically most challenging because Axel and I were for some time, with a small number of people, the only ones who said, okay, this should not happen, and please stop it. But yeah, not many wanted to listen. And also personally, it was very challenging to work on something where you are not really convinced that this is the best for Europe in the current form. And yeah, that we now have already an omnibus on the AI. I think
We talk
we are
about
right.
that.
And yeah, maybe still on a very personal level, um, we were also under huge stress. So especially the last day of negotiations, in the end took 1.5 days, almost 2 days, and we had just a sleeping break of 7 hours or 6 hours. So it was, in the end, it was 36 hours of constant negotiations. And this was, yeah, I would say it was physically and mentally the most challenging moment I had in my whole professional life.
And what are the biggest obstacles? Was it technical complexity or political power plays or institutional fragmentation?
Yeah, probably a combination of all. So especially if you work on digital topics, there are, of course, as I said, so many developments that are so quickly taking place that often policies and laws are running behind and never being able to catch up. And so many things also are happening in certain niches, in certain regions, in certain countries that we are not aware about. So it's almost impossible to be fully aware of what is happening. Just again, to become super concrete, we had discussions on deepfake and how to regulate
Yeah, I
deepfake
know.
in the AI Act. Back then, I was on a technical level in lead of those discussions, and I was facing a situation where researchers couldn't agree if, for example, it's
Yeah,
possible in
yeah.
technical terms to create an obligation to include watermarking in order to detect deepfakes, for example. Yeah, what do I do in this situation? So it's sometimes, yeah, it's really tricky because you here often don't have also the capacities to really do deep dives, to talk
Yeah.
with all the necessary experts in time. Then the second point that you mentioned, power plays, political power plays, is unfortunately always a problem, that even though you sometimes know exactly what you need to do, party politics is then coming in, and then a not related point is more important than the content related point. So let's say everyone agrees, it's now a fictional example, everyone agrees this law should be applicable after 2 years or after 1 year because it's important. But then there are two parties that are very powerful that agree because one member state doesn't manage to do that in time. You are in the need to decide on 5 years or whatsoever. And this is also frustrating because you know what should be done if you think about the content, but then political points are going in. And the last point that you mentioned, institutional fragmentation, is also a super, super annoying point because I mentioned deep fakes, but let's maybe take another topic for the listeners, maybe interesting, the finance area or insurance area. In the AI Act, we are also regulating this area, but the people that were responsible for the AI Act in the Commission, in the Council, in the Parliament, were not experts at all in the pharma area, in the health insurance area, in the financial areas. And because of competences and because of competition between those entities, they also didn't want to involve the experts on those topics. And then again, you are creating rules that are overlapping, for example, with the medical device regulation. And my boss and I and a few other people here in the parliament were the only ones that were, for example, indicating that the medical device regulation and the AI Act would overlap. The Commission always rejected our finding. And yesterday, the Commission announced, but very, very secretly hidden in the last page of a paper, that they indeed will now start an omnibus proceeding where they clarify that the medical device regulation is lex specialis and the AI Act is lex generalis. Something we advocated for 4 years. The Commission didn't want to listen to it. Now, again, without explaining why they suddenly agree with us after disagreeing with us for 4 years, they are changing it. And yeah, those are all examples why it's sometimes extremely frustrating. And I would say you could summarize it as, unfortunately, very often it's not the most logical decision or the decision that makes sense because of certain needs, certain opportunities, certain risks. But there are, in German, you would say fachfremde Gründe. So there are content non-related reasons. And this makes me often very angry because this is not how I would think politics should be like or work like.
Well, you worked as well in several groups, Yuri, Liebe, AIDA. What was that sound? What was the highlight in the work
Yeah.
in this for?
Yeah, so what you mentioned are committees of the European Parliament, and indeed, Axel even today is part of the Liebe committee, so they are doing mostly fundamental rights, data protection, migration, those things. He was also and is still working in URI, which is the legal committee. And he was also one of the leading MEPs of AIDA, which was a special committee on AI and data. And I was just mentioning AIDA, so the special committee. And I think I want to focus my reply on this committee because it was a special committee without legislative power, so we couldn't do any laws or similar things, but we did a report which basically created a roadmap for Europe, how to digitize and so on. And I really enjoyed this committee because all those problems that we just discussed were not there or only partially there, because it was as a special committee, politics didn't really play a role. Political parties didn't really care about what happens there, because also this committee didn't really have this legislative power that I was talking about. So we were a little bit on our own. We could do what we wanted to do. And this
That's good.
combined with the fact that there were really interested parliamentarians that had a lot of knowledge on AI, and also their staff, their assistants. So in the end, we had really, yeah, you could you could call it an expert committee. And I would claim that our final report was quite good. And yeah, was really trying to or achieving to find a very balanced, pragmatic proposal in the end, which is often not the case in other committees. If you, because you also asked me about the other two that I'm still working in. If I compare now the fundamental rights, migration, and so on committee, LIBE, with the legal committee, URI, I would say I prefer often my work in the legal committee, because also there it's more technical. Politics plays a role, but less. While in LIBE, as I said, migration, law enforcement, it's those topics where parties with their positions are often clashing and cannot agree. So it's much more, let's say, much more with fights, with polarization and so on, which by person I dislike.
I can understand that. But let me take your most favorable success, the AI Act.
Yeah,
What do you consider as the real big innovation in the AI Act?
yeah. Well, the AI Act, and we will talk a little bit about it later, still probably, but the AI Act has a lot of pros and cons. But since you asked me about the most important point and the most positive point, what is very good with the AI Act, and even more with the AI strategy that the Parliament and the Commission and the member states agreed on before the AI Act, is this idea of creating an ecosystem in Europe that is fostering the development of safe AI, also the deployment of safe AI, raising skills in AI literacy, making basically everyone comfortable to develop, to deploy, and to use it finally, or be confronted with it as an end user. For example, if you talk with a chatbot of a bank or whatsoever. And I really believe still this is the best the European Union can do, because if we are just thinking about technological advances, probably nowadays China, the US have more money, have more scale, and so on. So trying to find different ways, a so-called third way, or European way to digitize, to create AI, is probably a really smart thing, because you could leverage a competitive edge. You could stand for something different that is also becoming interesting for other countries, and so on. And this, the AI Act partially achieved. Certain parts from the AI Act are indeed going in this direction. If you, for example, think about risk management, Article 9, if you think about incident notifications in 73, if you think about also this idea of regulatory sandboxes, where you are building centers of excellence, where the public sector is helping the private sector to build this trustworthy AI, and so on. So all of that is very, very good, in particular in theory, because as I said already, in practice, or in reality, there are some problems when it comes to clarity of the law. So how to do what is standing in is there. But yeah, as you ask about the positive things, I really still would say that this original idea behind the AI Act and the broader AI strategy was really the right thing to do for the EU.
Yeah, I agree. But the critics are arguing it's slowing down innovation, it kills the AI industry. Do you believe in that as well? Is there a risk?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a risk. It's not the case, I would say, however, that regulation by nature is killing innovation. It's not either or, so that you can only innovate without regulation. I would I would say actually the opposite, that with clear regulation, it's safer for industry to innovate because they have legal certainty. And again, this is going back to the original AI strategy with this idea of building an ecosystem of trust, that also companies know exactly what they need to do in order to be compliant, and so on and so on. But the critics are right that as the AI Act is currently being written, and to give again an example, that you have a situation that Article 5, with this long list on prohibitions, is written in such a vague, overly complex,
Also,
and unclear way that you need 150 pages of guidelines from the Commission to attempt to make it a bit clearer which use cases are in the future prohibited. And even after those guidelines of 150 pages, it's actually not clear at all, then probably you made something wrong and you will not achieve this ecosystem
yeah.
of trust that we originally wanted to achieve. So again, the critics make a valid argument when they are saying that the AI Act, how it's currently being written and how it's currently looking like for industry, is indeed not super helpful when it comes to promoting innovation in AI in Europe.
But the critics as well criticize the enforcement architecture
Yeah.
because you have national level, European level, AI office. Isn't that as well too complex?
Yeah. No, indeed. This was also a big discussion in the negotiations already. You see in general in developments and more enforcement and digital governance is going to Brussels. You see it with the DMA, with the DSA, but also with other laws that are largely or solely even decided in Brussels by the Commission, by agencies, and so on. But on the AI Act, member states didn't want to give up more power. They wanted to keep some national competences and so on. However, in those last months, since the AI Act was adopted, and also since it entered into effect, they realized that especially smaller member states, many of the obligations that they need to fulfill, because they, for example, need to create a national competent authorities for enforcing, or national notification bodies that are doing the conformity assessments and so on. All of that requires money, requires AI talent, and so on. And that they don't have, especially nowadays with all the big spendings that member states are facing. And therefore, indeed, the enforcement architecture in Brussels, but in particular in member states, is far behind, which is why the European Union is currently discussing this stop the clock on AI, so extending the application date for 1 year or even more, because they don't see how they can still fulfill it. And there is now even more willingness from member states to transfer even more competences in enforcement to the European level, because they realize they cannot do it. So it's a quite interesting development, and probably we will see more centralization over the next years.
Yeah, I think too. And I just come this morning from a discussion in the University of Münster on high-level, high-risk categories. What is high-risk AI? And it was so difficult to know what is high risk, what is not high risk. And do you think the list of high-risk categories is political compromise, or is it a valid tool?
Yeah. Yeah, it's another, I would say, weakness of the AI Act, something that we criticized also from the beginning. We like the risk-based approach, not only in the AI Act, but also in other laws. And we feel that by listing certain use cases, you can, if you do it right, create legal certainty. But with that, I already mentioned or indicated that we didn't do it, because the problem from Annex 3, so the list of mostly
Yeah,
fundamental rights
yeah,
related high risk categories, is so vague that you don't really know what is falling under it. So, for example, point 5 with public services. Which public services are there? What is there discriminatory? There are things on employment where it's completely unclear if, for example, certain application proceedings that you would automate are certainly falling under high risk. In critical infrastructure, it's really weird to see that certain areas are high risk, but others are not. So there are differences between roads and cars and planes and ships and so on. So indeed, it was, you mentioned it, a political compromise, and some MEPs felt like roads should be in, others said roads should not be in, but trains should be in and rails should be in. And it's not really evidence-based. What I think would have been better if to narrow it down to extremely concrete
yeah,
use cases, and the
that's
same
true.
for Article 5. In Article 5 on emotional recognition, you see one exemption, which is saying that if emotional recognition is be used for security or safety purposes and something else, then it's not being banned. Just to give you context, this ban is in, or the exemption is in, because Airbus was flagging that in some member states, sleeping is considered an emotion, and they have an
Wow.
anti-sleep facial recognition or emotional recognition. And this, of course, should not be banned, because we don't want our planes to
Yeah.
crash down. But this shows, if you make a general ban or now a general high-risk use case on employment, you will integrate a lot of use cases that are not risky at all, that we as society even want to promote. But yeah, it all comes back to a lack of quality drafting and of taking time to narrow down what we really feel based on our ethics or our values, that should be some kind restricted.
Yeah. What happened at the 19th of November in your office?
19th of November.
Yeah.
So you mean with the Omnibus?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I
I
was
see the
asking
shock
because,
when you open the
yeah,
office and you see most parts of the AI Act are becoming bizarre.
yeah. Yeah, I was asking because Axel and I, my boss and I, we were actually at the Digital Serenity Summit in Berlin. And on the
Mhm.
19th, I was still in the train to drive back. But indeed, there are a lot of strange things about this omnibus. The general direction or the sheer existence of an omnibus is, of course, something we always advocated for. We always
Mhm.
felt that our digital rule book needs to be simplified, that it needs to be more coherent, that contradictions and overlaps needs to be removed or fixed.
Mhm.
But the way how the omnibus was presented, was written, and so on, is not giving us a lot of trust, let's say, because yeah, it's again very, very, very quickly or swiftly written text. The commission services we heard didn't have more time than 3 or 4 weeks to write the
Boah.
omnibus. There were not really consultations. There was no impact assessment at all.
Ja.
And what is really tricky also from a democratic point of view, as we just discussed, the vote on the AI Act is just 1 year ago. And
Ja.
now there are things that the Commission wants to change. And I made this point already before with medical device regulation that we criticized
Mhm.
for years. And they didn't care. They said, well,
Boah.
it's not the case, it doesn't matter, it's not significant. And now they are partially trying to fix those things in the AI
Mhm.
omnibus without telling us why they suddenly switch their mind. Other points are not really useful if you want to make it easier for industry to comply. Other
Mhm.
things might help, but are maybe technically not written in a sound
Mhm.
way. So what I can say is that member states, I talked with quite a lot, the majority of member states I talked to, they are completely in line with what the parliament largely thinks, that while some of the ideas might make sense, there's a lot of work to be done because the current proposal is really not up to the task, and it will not help companies. It will not help our citizens. It will not
Mhm.
convince everyone that AI after the omnibus passed is safer or becoming safer, and it would also not promote innovation in AI. So yeah, especially the timing is really weird.
Yeah, that's true. Do you understand why Ms. von der Leyen has decided to integrate new features of the GDPR in the omnibus? Because that, in my view, leads to a lot of criticism from Estonia, Poland, Austria. Why has he decided, for instance, to take e-privacy as a matter of the digital omnibus?
Yeah. I cannot really give you an, let's say, a really full-fledged answer where I know that this is the truth. So what I'm now saying is more based on my personal assumptions and my gut feeling. Um, it's the case that the Draghi report that I mentioned already, Mario Draghi, really highlighted how the GDPR and the AI Act are partially at fault for our digital industry to decline. He highlighted both as reasons why we are falling behind China and the US. So probably if you want to make a political sign, doing something on GDPR and AI therefore makes a lot of sense because it's the most significant laws that even Mario Draghi which was basically the starting point for the whole
Mm-hmm.
simplification process, is indicating, yeah, it's almost unavoidable. Where I, however, do agree with kind of your indication, or what you are implying with your question, is that mixing both and how the omnibus is putting certain parts, because as you know, it's not that we are reopening the whole AI Act or the whole GDPR or the whole e-privacy, but really picking out those particular points that we not always really play well together. It looks a little bit randomly how they picked out
Yeah.
certain points. So I also share confusion when I look at it, and I don't really see a big picture strategy behind it. And as you said, not only member states are sharing this confusion, but in particular in the European Parliament, more left-wing oriented political groups like Social Democrats and Greens are rather critical. And therefore, if you really wanted to solve certain things in the AI Act, I think it would have been much better to do it in an isolated way and do, for example, certain data omnibuses later on in a few
Yeah,
months.
that's
So put
true.
it together. Politically, my gut feeling, I'm just a small staffer, so maybe our commission president has a different idea, but I don't really understand the strategy behind it, to be honest.
Most important question, what do you think, when will the digital omnibus be enacted?
Yeah, super difficult. Currently in the European Parliament, it's still not really being distributed, so it's not clear which parliamentarian will be in charge as so-called rapporteur, who the other political groups will send as so-called shadow rapporteurs. And yeah, there's also a lot of political pressure to get it done fast, but at the same time, many people are sharing this confusion that the two of us have, which is going against speed and rushing it through. So in the end, I would say it really depends on the people that are in the end identified as being responsible for pushing the file. And yeah, it's a little bit flip a coin political situation, which then depends on the political atmosphere, on geopolitical developments. If everyone is
Yeah.
occupied with Ukraine or whatsoever, it might help to push it through, or it might lead to a situation where there is no political capital or political momentum to come to a conclusion. So I think it could go through this year, but it could also be blocked indefinite. So there's really,
It's long.
they are both, there, everything is on the table right now.
Yeah.
So we really don't know right now. No one can really predict it.
Wow. And digital omnibus has to do with all acts, Data Act, DMA, DGA. What do you think of the long-term impact of these new statutes of the acts?
Yeah. So just to clarify, in the current digital omnibus, the focus is really on AI, data, a bit of cyber security, and those digital wallets, so EID. DMA, DSA is currently not being revisioned, or there are no legislative amendments out. But of course, it could happen, and we see already now that there's a lot of pushback from the United States against those laws. So it's of course quite interesting to see how it's now playing out legislatively. But your question was targeting more about how those laws are being implemented, what to expect. I think it's currently also here difficult based on what we see right now. I do feel that most publicity, probably the DMA and DSA, and maybe still the GDPR will get, because here we will probably see the biggest fines. So if companies doing certain things wrong, and there you can already issue those fines. In the AI Act, it will still take a bit. So if now the stop the clock is going through, also the fines would only kick in 1 year later. So mostly then in 2027. And then it's almost already again election times. So in May or June 29. So I guess we will see a lot of news reporting on DSA versus Twitter, DSA versus Google, DMA versus Apple, and so on and so on. And the other things, maybe addressed by here and there an omnibus, maybe here and there some implementation problems in the member states. And then the big question mark is really on another activity of the Commission that they announced for next year or even 27. I don't remember correctly. After the digital omnibus, the Commission wants to do a digital fitness check that is basically checking all existing digital laws of the European Union and rework them, make them more coherent. And this, I think, would be tremendously important, because again, I do believe many of those laws have a very good intention, are trying to achieve the right policy goals, but right now, as they are written, as they are sometimes overlapping, contradicting itself, we are not really achieving what we do want to achieve. So if we would be able to figure out a way how to use our laws better, it would be great. And then maybe we will see really much more positive developments and actions from 27, 28 onwards.
That leads me perfectly to my next topic. What do you think of the EU global role as AI in AI regulation? Do we face perhaps in 10 years a global governance framework comparable to the Paris Climate Agreement?
Well, at the moment, it's not looking like that happening soon at all. Especially on AI, you saw that we have a kind of area of cooperation, where countries like the US, the European Union, Brazil, Singapore, Japan, and so on, all shared a common set of principles, OECD principles, but also G20 principles. And even though the AI policies were quite differently, having the same ethical standards helped a lot, and there was a lot of cooperations. And now the US has a quite opposite, sometimes even opposing AI policy towards the European Union. Also, the level of cooperation declined on staff level when it comes to, I don't know, harmonizing the approaches on, let's say, incident monitoring and so on and so on. So we are really not there yet. Of course, those things can change fast. If we have a new US government in 3 years, if we have a new commission president after 29, maybe there is a chance to find a common agreement internationally. I would, however, make one claim. on climate change, and we see how difficult it is, because now there are also countries that don't feel committed anymore to the climate protection rules and so on. But on climate protection, you have a risk. You have a lot of studies that are saying the international community needs to act. They need to act fast, and they need to act in unity. They need to act together. On AI, do we have something like this? I would
No.
say maybe we have those reports on AGI, that artificial intelligence is taking over the world. I'm smiling a bit because I do think it's maybe a scenario far away, but maybe there is a percentage of that happening, but I would not see it as that
Yeah.
likely right now. And I would claim that most of the prime ministers have a similar understanding. So where I see a difference to climate protection and to your example on an UN level
Yeah.
agreement is that there is not a common fear, a shared fear that something bad is happening. And then we are always coming to national interest. No? Why should China agree to limit the advances, or the United States to limit the advances of their AI labs for some random or far away threats? If this would mean that maybe others would not stop and they would get in a disadvantage. No? I think there it's really, yeah, we are living in a world of realism in political terms again, and everyone is fighting for itself. And therefore, right now, I don't see any chance for such an international AI agreement.
Well,
But let's see.
let me come to my last questions.
Yeah.
If you could implement 3 institutional reforms tomorrow without constraints, what would that be?
Very good question. Two I have immediately, so I don't know about the third, but maybe while I'm talking, I remember something. So the first one, we talked a little bit about better regulation, and we have in the European Commission the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, which is, in my opinion, underfunded, understaffed. It's also part of the Commission, so I would not consider them as completely neutral, in my personal opinion. I think there would be, yeah, some positive advantage of creating a fully independent task force or body that is really making sure that all EU institutions, even if we are in crisis mode, if there are a lot of immediate actions necessary, are still fulfilling good governance principles, better regulation principles. Because as I said, all of those are in our books. We have guidelines, we have the EU treaties, and
Yeah.
so on. Also, we have an European Court of Auditors in Luxembourg, which is doing amazing work, but most of the reports are not being considered here in Brussels. And there's also no clear follow-up. There's no execution. So to create some body like that, but also making sure that it's not being politically appointed, so that some party person is becoming boss of this institution, because by doing that, you are immediately capturing it and it doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
So this is number one. Number two, and now I have three. Number two is, I was a big fan of the general idea that President Macron pushed with his conference for a future of Europe, where he asked member states to designate, how do I say, to designate ambassadors from citizens. So I think there were 80 citizen ambassadors that were coming here, but also other groups, in order to avoid a situation where Brussels becomes an ivory tower, where we don't really understand what is happening in the field. And maybe we don't need to create a citizen parliament here in a citizen body in Brussels, or to go back in history, create something like in the Roman Empire in order to bring citizen wishes or needs to Brussels, because we have already the Committee of Regions, where mayors and other regional leaders are. I think using this Committee of Regions more, they are doing a lot of policy work, they are writing opinions and so on, but again, they are not really considered. And I think we would do much better, and we would fight much better against populism if we are using this institution more. And the third one is something that we in EPP, or part of the EPP, but also the Greens, the Social Democrats, part of the Liberals are advocating for, is a digital enforcement agency, fully independent from the Commission. Because, as you know, the Commission is nowadays a political commission. Ursula von der Leyen, but also her commissioners, are making a lot of political statements. And at the same time, with DMA, DSA, they are enforcing against companies like Google and so on. But an enforcer needs to be unbiased, objective, not political. So having a political commission to enforce digital laws is very tricky. It's easy to attack the commission or to attack the findings by creating this situation. And there's also the question of independence, political interference, of capacity building, and so on. Our feeling is that a fully independent body would be better able to attract really good technical experts that would feel maybe they are also more comfortable, would have their more freedom to act and so on. So I would say those three options I would love to immediately implement.
Perfect options. And the last option, my last question, then we
Yes.
are done. What advice would you give to young students, especially from Münster? I've learned you have a relationship to Münster as well.
Yes.
Who want to engage in digital governance in Brussels.
Yeah.
What would you recommend them to do?
Yeah. So indeed, I was 2.5 years in Münster, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah, thinking back also to that time, one of the things I did good, I also made a lot of mistakes in my studies, as everyone. It's part of growing up, I would say. But the things that I'm really happy that I did it was that from early on, I did a lot of internships, and I used these internships, but also other opportunities to come in contact with people working in the political field, with people working in Brussels, in Berlin, in areas that I was interested in, and having a lot of informal talks. Because many students are afraid to write an email to a person. They are sad if they are getting a rejection, if someone is saying, sorry, I don't have time. But this is never meant, or for most of the people, is not meant on a personal way or in a mean way. It's just the case that some of them don't have time, but most of them will be very willing and very happy to talk with you, to talk with those young professionals. And you are actually learning a lot by doing this talk. So in my case, I met, I don't know, probably almost 100 people during my studies and during my internships, where I basically just had a very open talk about what I'm trying to do later on, if they have some general tips for the first steps into your professional life, finding a job, if they maybe know someone who is looking when I'm finished with my study, who is offering some internship position, and maybe if it was someone from an employer that I like, if they themselves have some vacancies. And back then, when I was finished with my study, we were just in the middle of the economy crisis, and the job market was not so easy. And I need to say, my normal applications, even though the grades in the end were good, I would say. They were my applications were not that successful because it was just a very difficult time to finding a job. There were almost no jobs because of the economic crisis. But by doing my meetings with practitioners, I got so many invitations and offers for internships, for jobs, and so on, that in the end I could really choose. And not many people do it. So if you find the courage to use a French word and just do it and just do those talks, I'm pretty sure you will have a very similar impression like me, that you are benefiting a lot. And also on a personal level, it's helping you because you learn how to speak, you learn how to behave in those meetings, you learn what the other side want to hear, what they expect, what are certain practices that you only learn in your job, and so on. So yeah, this would be really something I would advise everyone to do.
Great, great.